Welcome back to The Blind Perspective. Last week's video, we talked a little bit about growing up with albinism. So today we're going to talk a little bit about being an adult with albinism. There are many aspects of being an adult. So we are going to kind of do this a little bit more in sections, I think. So today we're going to talk about working, having a job, because that's kind of the first main struggle that you start off with coming into adulthood. So when I was a kid going through school, I always wanted to be a teacher. I thought that was a great job, and it is a great job. But as I started to get older, I started to be a little bit concerned if I could do the job. I mean, I couldn't even read my own schoolwork. How was I going to read somebody else's schoolwork to grade it? And, being able to monitor children and what they're doing. I kind of gave up on the idea of being a teacher because I really thought I was not able to be a teacher. So when I first got out of high school, I took one of those little fancy tests that tells you what you would be good at. And for me, it was working on a computer. Like literally, they decided that the job that would be best for me was involving computers. And I thought, I'm legally blind. I really don't feel like computers is what I want to be doing. So I kind of was like, whatever. So I decided to get a job at a daycare because it still involved kids. So I started working at the daycare. Now, there are many challenges when you can't see working at a daycare. One, being able to see the children out on the playground, things like that. Just like at school, I started developing my own ways kind of to deal with this. So what kind of started naturally happening is I would start catching on to the clothes that certain kids were wearing. I would start to learn very quickly, okay, Johnny has a red coat, Timmy has a blue coat, something along those lines. So when they were out on the playground, I could identify them by the colors that they were wearing. Usually I could kind of tell a little bit of their hair, the hair color, things like that. If we were inside, it was a little bit smaller, so I could see a little bit more of them. But generally speaking, I would use their overall, their clothing, their shoes, whatever it was, I would use things like that. I started kind of listening for their voices so I could tell which kids were kind of over in this area. So if there was a problem, I kind of already had it narrowed down to 3 kids, The funny thing about this is when things would show up, like, there'd be a rogue pair of shoes sitting around somewhere and everyone's like, whose shoes are these? And nobody knows. I was always the one that could answer that question. Oftentimes things would end up getting washed in the washer and then they would end up still there at the daycare. And it was like, well, whose shirt is this? I was usually able to tell you which kid that belonged to. When it was story time and I was the one who had to read the stories, I would handpick specifically the books that I either knew really well and basically had memorized, or the font was really big. Because, if you're reading stories to kids, you have to hold it up for them to see, and it's in a group setting. So there were definitely challenges with that job, but I was able to kind of work around a lot of the challenges. It took a little bit of time, and then I was able to kind of work around it. Something that I have found that has been really interesting is that I can find things that other people can't find. And I used to do this at the daycare, and somebody would be looking for something and they can't find it. And I would walk in the room and be like, oh, it's right there. And it would drive everybody crazy because, of course, if a blind person can find it, what is wrong with me, But here's what I think is the reason why. I think it's because I look for objects differently. I look for the shape and the color of an object. And I guess it tricks the mind and I actually see it because it's like, if you're looking for the specific object, then it's almost like your mind will kind of like just go right over it sometimes. but because I'm looking for a color or a shape that associates to it, I don't know. That's my assumption, but it's been a great, fun little joke through the years that like I can find things other people can't find sometimes. I mean, to be fair, other times I can't find things, you know, like I mentioned in my previous video, seeing socks and assuming it was an umbrella. So, you know, it's both ends of it, okay? So my next job was working at Starbucks. Now the Starbucks I worked at, we didn't have the touchscreen thing where you could like go through the menu. You had to actually punch in physical codes. And we had a code sheet, but this was kind of before smartphones were a big deal. This was around the time I was getting a smartphone, but I hadn't quite started figuring out, I hadn't quite realized that I could take pictures of things so that I could see it. Like that wasn't part of my tactic. Now I do that all the time. But it took me a while to figure out that like, hey, I'll just take a picture. But I didn't have a smartphone quite yet when I was working at this job. So I didn't have a way to just have it and zoom in and things like that in a little bit more of an electronic form. An iPad would have been great for that situation. So as a result, I just took the code sheet home and memorized the whole thing. It was kind of the only thing I could do. Now, to give you a bit of an idea of how many codes this was, every single drink, so just take, for instance, one drink, okay? So take, for instance, a vanilla latte. A vanilla latte, you can get hot, iced, or blended. It also comes in 8 ounce, 12 ounce, 16 ounce, and 20 ounce. So that's 4 sizes with 4 temperatures, you can say. That right there is 12 different codes, and that's one drink. And if you know Starbucks, you know there's a lot more drinks than that. I don't honestly know how many codes it was, but it was a lot of codes and I memorized it. Fortunately for me, memorization was something I developed a skill for because it's always been something I've been a little bit good at, but I kind of have to. It's not because I am good at memorizing, it's because I learned and developed that skill over time, because when you can't see things, you have to start remembering things, you know? I mean, I mentally will remember, okay, right here, there's this like jaunt in the sidewalk. You know, I will start to remember the most random things, but that's how I do it. That's the only way you can do it when you can't see it. So I did. I memorized the entire code sheet, which was kind of fun because then when I was at the register, I could just type in the codes. So that job had, you know, a few challenges, but overall, pretty much anything that was a challenge at that particular job, I could just memorize it, anything I couldn't see. Because for the most part, you know, that's pretty much it. So let's fast forward to graphic design. As I mentioned in a previous video, I am a graphic designer right now. And I know you're thinking, well, how in the world did that happen? Yeah, I wonder that too myself, I'm going to be honest. Because, like I said, that little test I took was like, you'll be great on computers. And I was like, no. So I'm finding the irony, trust me. So I started doing graphic design work at my church. I started with little things. I started with doing PowerPoint announcements for during the service time. And then I kind of started getting involved in making the bulletin each week. And then I started kind of getting involved in PowerPoints for special services. Like when we'd have like a 4th of July service, we'd have the words up on the screen. And we would start doing little videos, like tribute videos and things like that. Mother's Day, Father's Day, law enforcement appreciation, just, you know, just special videos that were kind of like a compiling of clips or pictures with music, with some audio, or, you know, some speaking, whatever it might be. I kind of started getting involved in doing some of that stuff. I had a friend there at church who actually had gone through and gotten degrees in video production and digital media. So, you know, I would talk to her, and she was like, why don't you go and take some of the same classes I did? And I was like, listen, okay, high school was bad enough being legally blind. College is certainly not going to be any easier. And she's like, but they have a really good disabilities program there. So I was like, okay, fine. It would probably be fine to just ask some questions, right? Well, in order to have this meeting to kind of get some ideas, you need to at least have enrolled and you need to have been accepted into the college. And so I was like, okay. So I went ahead and did that. And I was like, I'm still not sure, but you know, whatever. This is just a few steps. So then I went and I talked to them about, you have to take the placement test. And so I was talking to them about accommodations for that. And they're like, okay, so here's the accommodations that we can do for you having a visual impairment. So you have a visual impairment. So have you given any thought to what you want to study? And I said, yeah, I want to do graphic design. There was silence on the other end of the phone. And I thought to myself, that probably does sound really shocking if you're not prepared for that. I'm going to give her a minute. And then she was like, oh, okay. Now you do know that's on computers, right? And I'm like, yes, I do it already for my church. So I kind of, you know, I'm kind of already involved in it. And she told me, she's like, I've been working this job for 20 years and I've never had a visual impairment go through the graphics department. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I could help you out. So I went through, did graphic design. So I've been doing graphic design kind of ever since. I do a little bit of freelancing. So I know what you're thinking. That is literally visual work. How do you do that? Well, my computer is a huge contributor to that. And at some point, I'm going to show you specifically some of the features that I do on my computer. But I'm just going to show you one thing. This right here is the key, okay? So if you can see this, I'm hoping you can. So I have a keyboard shortcut that will allow me to turn my mouse into a magnification, like this. So if I come up here to this top corner, I can zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom. Now you know when I have filmed this video, but I can zoom and zoom and zoom. I mean, look at how big that font is. That is huge. So that's the key to my success on the computer. So, you know, I've been doing graphic design since then, and I've been getting my feet wet in more projects here and there. You know, honestly, starting this YouTube channel, I do the editing myself, and but the key is having a computer that I can easily see what's going on. That's really the key. I'm sure that there are going to be some more of this type of thing where we talk some more about job related things, but for the most part, that gives you a bit of an idea of kind of going into the work field. Because what can be really overwhelming is when you start getting to that age, you start coming out of high school, and the expectations of you should know what you want to do and you should have a plan. It's overwhelming for anybody, but when you add a visual impairment to it, it's even more overwhelming because the self-doubt kicks in and you're like, can I do anything? Am I going to be able to do something and be a part of society? You know, it's a little overwhelming. So I hope this encourages you that, once again, kind of like I said in my last video, the only limitation is your fear. And it is very scary to kind of get out there and dip your toes into things that you're not really confident you're going to be able to do. But you will start naturally developing your own ways around things. So I hope that this kind of helps encourage you, because if you're a person who's kind of either coming into adulthood, or maybe you're still kind of trying to figure out what you want to do. I want you to be encouraged that having a visual impairment doesn't mean you can't do something. Obviously, there are some jobs that we are not going to be able to do. Okay, there are some legitimate things, you know, for whatever reason, they won't let me do jobs that involve driving a car. I don't get it. I think I'd be perfectly fine at it. I'm just going to say. So probably a delivery person, not going to work out. However, aside from things like that, there's really a lot of things that you can do that you would be surprised that you could do. One of the best things I did was get into Facebook albinism community and start finding out the different jobs that people had. And I was like, wow, okay. And there were other people who were teachers and they had albinism. And I was like, okay. Just try to figure out what things you can do to kind of work around some of your things you can't do as well. Because you will be surprised. You will surprise yourself at how you can work around some things. You just kind of have to let yourself kind of come up with new ways of doing things. You know, start figuring out. So something I was kind of thinking about is the way we have learned to do things is kind of the standard way of doing things. What I mean by that is, okay, you know, when your teacher taught you or your parents taught you how to do whatever particular task, let's just say, for instance, doing the laundry, something really simple, right? When they taught you how to do the laundry, they said, okay, here's what you're going to do. They give you instructions based on what is kind of their experience, right? They can see. So therefore, they're going to give instructions from the perspective of a person who can see. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, for us, we can't see. So we just kind of have to break the mold a little bit and find a different way. So for instance, okay, if I was going to tell you how to go in my laundry room and use the laundry, I would tell you, push the button on this side, you know, the bottom left button here and the bottom left button here. Put the money in, you're good to go. If you have no vision impairment, you would walk in there and you would say, you're going to push cold water, gentle, whatever, you know, all that stuff. And then you're going to push the start button. And, you know, so you're going to give directions based on what it says, because that's what makes sense. So it doesn't mean that we can't do it. We just figure out what that button is, and then we just know where that position is. And that's what we do. We turn the knob to this particular thing, or we push the button that's in this particular location. So we just see it differently. So basically it comes down to figuring out the other ways to see it. And that's really what it is. You know, we can't see the normal way. We see a different way as it is. So that's kind of what each of us have to do individually, is figure out our way of seeing things differently. Now, if you have any questions related to jobs, or, you know, kind of have some struggles in the work field that maybe you want to see if there's any advice that somebody has out there for you, go ahead and leave it down in the comments below. And, you know, hopefully we can learn more from each other. Stay tuned, because we're going to have more videos about the adult life with albinism.